Welcome to the Healing My Parts podcast, a podcast dedicated to educating and raising awareness about dissociative identity disorder, also known as DID. We are your hosts, the system behind Healing My Parts, which also includes parts that function as a therapist and leader in a mental health niche space. We'll be sharing tips and tools that have helped us and many others, while also sharing insights from our own journey of living with the condition. We'll also be hosting guests for conversations to help educate, dispel myths, and most especially help those living with dissociative identities and professionals who treat the condition. Thank you so much for tuning in. And now, let's get healing. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. It is such a pleasure to kick off this episode with Dr. Mike Lloyd, who is a consultant clinical psychologist specializing in complex trauma and dissociative disorders. He also happens to be the director of the Complex Trauma and Dissociation Clinic, which many of you know as the CTAD Clinic. He is also the director of Cheshire Psychology in the UK. And I am certain that most of you listen to Dr. Lloyd on the YouTube channel, the CTAD Clinic. So welcome to the show today, Dr. Mike Lloyd. We are so thrilled.
Brilliant. Great introduction. Thank you. Okay, first of all, you got the CTAD bit right. When I was like, some people still say like CTAD, and it's like, oh, you can do it simpler than that. CTAD is perfect.
I am way too lazy to say CTAD. So.
I know, it's too many things to say.
Way too many. I wonder if there's anything that I missed that you might like folks to know about you.
I mean, I guess on a professional level, it's all those things absolutely correctly. I suppose, you know, if you spent any time looking at the CTAD clinic, you realize that there's an element of ducks involved in the whole thing. I suppose the thing that might be of use is that this whole situation that I'm living in at the moment is a dream I've had since I've been about 12, 13 years old or something. So it's kind of living here and having this space and in the countryside with all the ducks and everything, and doing up this kind of ridiculous farmhouse that my wife and I bought a few years ago. It all came from the Tom Hanks film, The Money Pit, in the 80s. I watched that film and I said, watching it, I want that. I want to do this ridiculously stupid house renovation, half kill myself to get there, and then wake up one morning and realize it's done. And then that's my dream. And it is this. So I'm a dreamer. I suppose that's the thing. I have big dreams and I work frantically hard to get there.
We love dreamers, and I actually personally relate to the money pit, but not purposefully. We just happened to purchase one.
Cool. Excellent.
Have been doing work on that for the last 22 years now. Wow.
Gosh. Okay.
Getting old, I guess.
Yeah. It's quite a thing, isn't it? It grabs you.
You also like cats, if I remember correctly. Don't you rescue cats as well?
Yes. Well, we've currently got 8.
Oh my goodness.
I know, which puts you into a certain whole category of weird straight away, but I'm all over it. I'm absolutely fine. We just keep rescuing cats, and you know, we've got loads of the place we've moved into in the village. There's some little sort of these. We have the big sort of RSPCA, the Royal Society for the Protection of Cruelty to Animals and things. So, but we have these local care home things for cats and the rescue centres and things. So. And we've affiliated ourselves with them, and we help them with charity stuff and things. So we end up taking some of the cats. So yeah, we currently have 8, and it's quite a lot.
I can sort of imagine. At one point we had 3 cats, but I have downgraded to 1 pit bull mix that we rescued. So we just have a dog right now.
Oh gosh, okay. I can't even imagine what just having 1 cat feels like anymore. It's been such a long time since I just had one. Like childhood type thing.
I feel like 1 cat is sometimes easier than 1 dog, because where the dog is always looking for attention, the cat mostly runs the house. Not sure about you, but
oh no, they do.
They're pretty sure that we just live in their space, not the other way around.
Yeah, they run the show. We just kind of gravitate around and provide services as required.
Oh, I like the way that's phrased. That's so accurate. Let's dive in a little bit to some of the DID content, because I know that factually, so many people are looking for information, and you are an incredible source.
Oh, thank you.
Of information. So truly, for folks listening, if you haven't tuned into the CTAD YouTube channel, you really need to. Dr. Lloyd has some phenomenal content on there that's really helpful both for therapists and for clients alike.
Yeah, good.
And also family members in terms of supporters, right? Trying to understand what's happening for folks.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's what I wanted. All purpose help kind of thing.
It's fantastic. So I'm curious about your thoughts about this because it's something that has been, it sort of irritates me a little bit. It's really clear when we look at global prevalence statistics, right?
Yeah.
They put DID right around 1 to 1.5%.
Mm.
There's a couple of studies I've seen as high as 3.5%.
Yeah.
Those seem more the outliers. Interestingly, I was reading a journal article by Dr. Bethany Brand, and she was placing some of the stats for like inpatient, outpatient clinics at 6%.
Yeah,
So, compared to some other diagnostics like schizophrenia, for example, it's actually pretty high.
it is.
Now, interestingly, I'm not sure if this is the same in the UK as it is in the US. Over here, certainly when I was in grad school, which granted is a while ago now, but even today, we're told you get to the dissociative disorders and you get to DID, and professors say, it's so rare, you'll never see it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, yeah. Or even worse, it's not a thing at all. Like
Yeah.
it's just yeah. So
Yeah.
it's just not there. I mean, you know.
I was going there next.
Yeah, okay.
Then there are the like, we don't believe it exists. I'm like, it's
Yeah.
awesome to know that my existence on the planet is fictitious.
I know, isn't it? I know it's just so I don't really get that mentality as such, given that there is a whole host of stuff going back so many years about it. I mean, all the way back to Pierre Genet. I mean, this is like we've got over 100 years of recorded, documented evidence of this being a thing, and yet there's folks in the health services that are going, no, that's just not a thing. It's a either a research phenomenon or you guys are creating this somehow, or it's just on TikTok or whatever it might be now. It's quite frustrating hearing that.
It's bizarre in so many ways. Sometimes it feels like people are saying, if you have OSDD or DID, prove it. Nobody can see the air quotes I'm making to you, but
Yeah.
prove it. And so we'll give you multiple instruments, which I think can be important. And then we'll try to develop instruments to validate the instruments that we've given you to make sure that you have this thing. And I can't think of another diagnosis in the DSM or the ICD that we are trying to make people prove that they have it. I've never in any of the environments that I've worked have ever seen anyone say to someone who suffers from schizophrenia, prove that you're hallucinating,
No.
prove that you have this delusion.
Yeah.
And yet
I know.
we do seem to do that with folks with DID and OSDD. Prove that you have these personalities, prove that you have these alters.
Yeah, there's clearly something about this which is kind of hostile to an intellect of sorts. Because I remember working in child and adolescent services way back, and I think some like, was it the oppositional defiant disorder or pathological demand avoidance stuff? These things just suddenly arrived in the narrative of clinical work. You suddenly get like a pediatrician referring a kid to us, let's say 8 years old, pathological demand avoidance. And I remember saying, what on earth is that? I mean, isn't that just a kid that doesn't like to be told what to do? And it's like, no, that's a thing now. And that got in there, and that just suddenly arrived. And I don't know what the research is. I don't know what the evidence base is. I don't know what the prevalence studies are. I don't know whether there's the multi-country, multicultural, different social class research about this all over the world, like there is for DID, but it's suddenly there and everyone just completely accepts it because it's got initials. Well, dissociative identity disorder has initials. What makes it so different? And I think it stems all the way back to the desire in some parts to just not have the cause being a truth. It's because all of those things are just about kids growing up or parenting or diet or whatever it might be. What we've got is a condition that is pretty much wholly based in trauma in childhood, and there's a sense that that can't be. Like when you start telling people about the stories that you've heard about where this has come from, what people have gone through, there's a real toxic kind of phobic, I don't want to know, I can't hear this, blah blah blah, put your hand over your ears and kind of like make it all go away. And I wonder how much of it is related to that. It just seems so intolerable that the cause can exist. So if we can't find the cause being tolerable, then the effect, the impact, the consequence, the condition can't really be a thing either. One exists with the other. If you get rid of one, you have to get rid of the other.
That probably makes the most sense, right? That certainly, I know for my own experience personally, as well as plenty of clients, when you have a really intense and long-term trauma history that's kind of ugly and gruesome,
Yeah.
if you're able to actually convey that in words without being completely devastated, people will immediately say, well, that couldn't have been the case.
Yeah.
Right. Because if that were the case, you wouldn't be able to say it like you just did, which means they also don't understand how dissociation works.
Precisely. I know. Yeah.
And I wondered too, there have been times I also wonder if the false memory syndrome era plays into that fairly significantly.
Mhm.
When we were first diagnosed, it was actually in 93 or 94, 94,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
whatever, a long time ago. It was actually prior to, MPD becoming DID
Yeah.
and right at the height of false memory syndrome. And I
Mm.
still remember the quote, which is, well, you have multiple personality disorder and good luck. No one is treating it because everyone's losing their license. So
Yeah.
just do your best.
Yeah.
Have a good life.
It's got a real legacy attached to it, really.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and it's so sad because you can have all sorts of theories about why that might be the case. The best being you're just trying to protect the interests of vulnerable people who suffer with memory problems. You don't want, professionals taking advantage and just implying. And I know that there have been some there is dodgy practice in therapy, but like I say to folks when we're doing our training courses, there's dodgy practices across all of physical and the mental health spectrum, right? Let's just not assume that DID has it better or worse than anybody else. There's problems in professional training and how people talk, how doctors, nurses, psychiatrists, whatever, talk to patients. Who's competent to treat all of those sort of issues. They exist for everything, but somehow this one has been singled out for targeting. And again, it's about that early childhood trauma type stuff.
It's scary when you think about some therapists who have had to really worry about keeping their licenses because they think someone's going to come after them simply because they're actually trying to help people.
They're trying to help. Yeah, yeah. And I've never met. I mean, it's recorded, it's written down. I've never met a therapist, and I speak to loads who's gone out of their way to try and convince a person of a history that they don't have. I've never met anyone who would want to do that or even know how to do that. I mean, I always come back to the horse riding thing. It's like I can't convince someone that they rode a horse when they were a 6-year-old kid. I can't think of a single way that I could convince someone with no doubt whatsoever that you rode a horse when you were a 6-year-old kid. Because people will be like, I know I didn't, because that's such a big deal, right? Sitting on a horse as a 6-year-old, you either have that memory or you don't. I can't just get a random person from the public and convince them that they did that. So if I can't convince them they rode a horse, how could I possibly convince them of all the dark stuff that therapists were being accused of convincing folks of?
Yeah.
You can't, right? So it's a problematic thing that sits in the history of this condition
Yeah.
with a design to kind of reduce the likelihood that anyone's going to take this stuff on. I think if therapists were being scared off doing this work, I think the goal is to scare therapists off doing this work.
It was certainly successful for a
Yeah,
period of time. It is nice to see more people being more willing to
yeah,
seek out training and be able to be helpful for folks who have DID and OSDD. I think too that I'm curious about your opinion on this as well. I don't know that the media is particularly helpful when it comes when it comes to
there's a
right.
surprise. I know. Who saw that coming? I know.
But the way in which they portray people with DID and OSDD is not reflective of what, bona fide DID and OSDD tends to look like.
Yeah.
So,
Inside Out being the outlier. Fight Club and Inside Out are
there.
the outliers, I think. But yeah, generally speaking, it's just a I think it's just an easy, it's like a jump shock in a horror movie, isn't it? That it's
Yeah.
the cat or something or whatever it might be. It's just you get to the end of the film and it's like, oh my God, it's DID. Oh, and I'm sitting there going, please don't do this. Just please. I've just spent an hour and a half watching this film and you've just totally wrecked it because of that. That's just stupid. I think it's just lazy writing in the main, but it has such an impact.
And goodness knows everyone that is the main character who has DID must harbor some serial killer as part of their system.
I know. As if people without DID aren't serial killer enough. I mean, I think the actual stats show that the vast majority of folks with sort of really, murderous intent to try and harm people are not actually suffering from these kind of conditions. So again, it's the singling out thing, isn't it? And it would be so nice. There are some good examples. I mean, like I said, there's a really good TV show, cop TV show in the UK called Marcella. And it was dissociative amnesia was kind of at the heart of everything for 3 or 4 seasons. Beautifully done, but it was up front, like you knew it was happening and it made sense to the plot. It wasn't a token grab at the end to surprise you. You were given it front and center, and you said, this is how this policewoman is this detective is sort of managing this case whilst clearly having her own childhood trauma and clearly being amnesic in places. And these dissociative seizures, these amnesic episodes would just sort of jump in at times of high stress, and she'd just be removed and relocated, and you'd watch her try and figure out where on earth she was and trying to get back to the case. I think it was beautifully done. It's a very good example of how it can be done as a narrative within a show without being used as a plot device, because it didn't actually, it was just about her. It's just what she carried. It wasn't really, it didn't help her solve the case. It wasn't like a superpower or anything. It got in the way constantly, but she managed to figure out a way through it. It was really tidily done.
That sounds great. Now I know most of us are going to be Googling that to see if we can get our
Yeah.
hands on it if we're not in the UK.
And it had one of the best endings. I mean, I'm not going to give anything away, but the final season, the final 10 minutes of that, my wife and I were cheering.
Oh,
It's
wow.
like, it was so great. You just so wanted there to be this ending, and they nailed it. It was so wonderful.
I wish there was more of that out there, because I think people have no idea what to look for. If you ask
Yeah.
most people this, what do you think of when you think of DID? People start
Yeah.
throwing out Sybil and some of the older
The obvious stuff.
these that are whatever, not super helpful.
But that's not the presentation. I mean, that's when we think in terms like covert, overt DID and stuff. The actual, the overt, the obvious stuff, the things that is, barn door DID, alters, switching, and all that stuff is very, really uncommon, realistically. Vast majority of it is so hidden, it's so private because people are terrified
Mm-hmm.
of this. So you don't really see it out there in the world in a big way, but people are affected by it enormously, but it's just not so super obvious unless you know what you're looking for, and then you can kind of see the signs.
Speaking of which, if especially for therapists who are maybe they've been in practice for a long time, but they're just sort of starting out thinking that
Yeah.
maybe they're seeing DID, OSDD in their clients, what are some of the signs that they might look for in their clients?
I think it's one of those ones where once you've got it, you've absolutely got it. And I'd say outside of stuff like people just describing their symptoms, I've got memory problems, and they might go into like a memory clinic or dementia type service in their 30s, they're looking because that's where memory gets assessed. Outside of that really obvious stuff, I think it's the ability to tell the difference between when someone is not listening to you because they've just kind of wandered off, right? They've daydreamed a little bit, and they're not listening to you because they're listening to something else. It's that is such a thing. And when you can pick it up, when you get it and you've seen it, you only have to see it in one person to really know the look of a person when they're listening inside their head, because then you can mention it. And that's one of the kind of nicest artistic things I think in therapy, is that when you sense you're talking to someone, but they're listening somewhere else, and you go, I think you might be listening to someone on the inside in there. Is that the case? And they kind of look really embarrassed and sort of nod and look and go, and it's okay that you're doing that. I know you're not really listening to me because you're listening to them, but they're super important. And it would be really great to know one day what they might be saying to you. Maybe not today, but eventually. And you make it completely normal and okay. But what they hear then is that you've seen that dissociation take place. It's not particularly dramatic. It's so quiet, and it's like a thoughtful type of dissociation. They're completely present. Their attention has gone elsewhere. And I think that in a therapeutic setting, I think you're likely with OSDD and DID, you're likely to see that, but it's probably taken place dozens and dozens of times before you notice it and reference it. And then once you get the look, you've got it. You've absolutely got it. And you can do so much good with that knowledge. So I'd say that's one of the key things to look out for, is just that sense of where the person is when you're sitting with them.
That is maybe the best explanation that I've heard.
Okay, right.
Like truly, that I've not even heard anyone talking about that over here, and yet it is so key.
Yeah, massively.
The first, just a personal share for folks listening, that the first time that I had a therapist that actually asked me that question, I was mortified, but also I was like,
Yes.
how the hell did you know?
Wow.
Like, how
Yeah,
did you
yeah, yeah.
know?
How can you tell?
Because all she said was, what did you just hear? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
It was almost jarring, but it was also really helpful. And it
Yes.
does.
Yeah, you're right. It can be jarring. And I think, that's why I say it's an artistic thing, because there's a science to it. I mean, underpinning everything is the neurobiological science of all of this. But the art is how you do it in a way that maintains respect and dignity. You do it thoughtfully, you do it carefully, with all the right intentions. And if it's done well, if you match that art and science bit together, then yeah, it might be really jarring, but the progression in therapy that you can get from that is wonderful. You're like, really, that is one of those quantum leaps in therapy that you can take with someone just by noticing.
And sometimes I think it helps the client figure out the differences between their alters and their thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's there are plenty of us who think that those
sure.
internal voices are thoughts, until somewhere in life you realize, oh, not everybody actually experiences that. Good to know.
I know. And me as a non-dissociative person, I mean, I get asked quite a bit by patients in the clinic, and they do it in a really funny way. They go, "So what goes on in your head?" And I go, "Not a lot, actually. I mean, there's just whole periods of my life when very little, because I know what I'm doing, so I'm just doing it. I'm not having thoughts, I'm not having messages, I'm not delivering an inner monologue. It's essentially a lot of the time incredibly quiet inside my head." And they just look at me like, "What? What is that? What do you mean?" Like they've got no frame of reference to understand that internal peace, that quiet, that calm. They're just astonished, and I have to go, yeah, I can't really describe it. It's just nothing.
I'm laughing because I'm still having that reaction.
Yeah, right.
Hard to imagine when things are busy.
When things are, it's the not busy. I mean, it's just it being non-dissociative and not a big stress head or anything. I mean, I can stress about things. I get stressed about things, but it's periodic. It arrives in a stressful time. There's a lot of brain activity, and then when it's gone, it's gone. I mean, I'm like like when you see in the nature documentaries, the deer being like chased down by the leopard or something, and it's while it's being chased, it's completely and utterly frantic. And then when the leopard just decides, or the cheetah just decides to give up because it can't get it, it just goes back to being a chilled out deer again. And it's just back to eating the grass and mooching around. And I mean, that's how we're supposed to be. So that's what it's like. And then when we share this my world versus your world type thing, it's a real opportunity to just, for me, the empathic connection to the patient. Oh God, what are you going through? And that sounds just so hard. And then they're just astonished at what it could be like when everything gets calm and quiet on the inside. So it's really nice sharing our worlds with each other in therapy to do that.
I think a lot of people don't, and you're making me realize how incredibly useful that can be. Personally, not the therapist to be doing that. However, the other therapists who are not dissociative, who can share that information,
Yeah, yeah.
may actually also help them sort of parse out
Hmm.
what's going on for their clients internally, and may alert them to the fact that there is a more complex dissociative disorder going on for their client.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're like, because if I describe, let's say I'm normal for want of a better word, right? Non-dissociative, not particularly traumatized, just kind of normal mind, just doing very little when it doesn't need to, in idle mode. If we say that that is essentially how the brain is supposed to be, it gives the person a real sense of how far removed they are from that, because they'll often say, it's not so bad, and I'm okay. And, I don't really know why I'm here. I don't know why I'm taking up your time. I don't feel like I'm that bad. And then we get into these conversations and can often stop and just go, you know what, it's pretty messy in there, isn't it? And that needs figuring out. And you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. It looks pretty messy from where I am, but I think you've got it.
I think there are also a number of therapists that believe that if you have DID or OSDD, that you're really not able to function well in the world.
Oh yeah, I mean that's not true at all, is it? But
No, not remotely. I think people don't understand the level of compensation, though,
Mm,
that happens when you have DID or OSDD, whether it is the use of
yeah.
a million lists, alarms. There's so many different things.
Alarms. Wow. Yeah.
A lot. I mean, even I'm rolling my eyes because I still do all of this stuff, but it works, learning to do things like check the sent items of an email before you check your inbox to see what you've already done sometimes is really helpful.
Gosh. Yeah.
Annoying, but it
But
works.
helpful.
Yes, it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's better than sending the same email two or three times if you don't remember. And alarms have been really beneficial for so many people that I know. But you integrate that just into your daily routine so you don't even notice how much you're compensating for things.
Yeah. But then you can have like a whole extra layer of messiness because you might have a part that obviously knows what your email is all about, gets in there and deletes your sent folder.
Please don't give anybody in here any ideas.
Yeah, please don't anybody think that that's a good idea. That's a
It's
terrible
it's a
idea.
very
But
bad idea.
I know it happens. I know there is that internal sabotage. It takes place because, there's a desire to hide. There's a desire to stay in and emails, phone, all this stuff. These are communications with the outside world. And there are parts that don't want the outside world. It's terrifying, scary, horrible. Let's just stay indoors, lock the doors, close it all down, hide, bunker down, and just be safe. And they will do
Yeah.
almost anything to arrive at that. So it can happen. Please don't let it, everyone listening. But there we go.
There's part of me that can also see a benefit in that if there are parts that would really like to communicate with a therapist, for example, and are blocked, that
Then blocked.
they might be able to actually get really important information over to their therapist and stay
Yeah.
safe by then deleting it. So I can see pluses and minuses in that strategy for sure.
Yeah. But it's something that I don't have to think about. I mean, again, back to that non-dissociative, like yardstick type thing. If I'm like a reference point, I don't have to do that. I mean, I might go back and check a sent folder of something I wrote like a year ago just to make sure I actually sent it. But that's because of normal memory failing me, that's not anything in the moment.
It's funny. I think a lot of people that struggle with it, it's very easy to explain away memory issues, right? I'm too busy. I'm too stressed. There's too much going on. I struggle with maybe ADHD. There's so many ways to explain away symptoms
Yeah.
that it does really take, I think, curious your opinion. I think it takes a really curious therapist sometimes to parse
Yeah.
it out with the client.
If they can get into therapy, I mean, I think often I think the threshold is just the friends, family, the good people that you might have around you. They just keep mentioning that whole, you know what, your memory is really bad, like, but it's also really brilliant, and that's what I don't understand. So when someone that you trust that well is referencing your memory, you need to get that checked out because, you can't remember stuff that we did yesterday, but you're happy to talk about stuff that took place 20 years ago in great detail. Like that's weird. That doesn't make sense. Sometimes that's why a person ends up in therapy because memory is often the first thing that gets seen that leads a person to go and speak to a doctor. Do I need a scan? Have I got a tumor? Is there something wrong with my brain because my memory is all over the place? And it doesn't make sense. It's inconsistent memory loss. So they go and see a doctor, they get a test, they might have a scan or we have like mini mental examination, sort of 30-point question to determine dementia, that kind of thing. They score really well on a lot of those things. So it's like, well, that doesn't make sense. And then then what? But that's often why the person gets into therapy in the first place, is that route.
That's great for folks listening to know, as some things to kind of look out for in yourselves, especially people who are newly diagnosed are often really
Yeah.
confused about where you begin. therapists are also sometimes confused about where to begin.
Well, yeah, we can be.
For people who don't necessarily treat trauma, so the field of expertise that I work in has an enormous overlap with trauma.
Yeah, of course.
And yet people try to kind of separate those out. I mean, in the US, so often you'll hear, I treat eating disorders, but I don't treat trauma. And then you hear people who say, I treat trauma, but I don't treat eating disorders. And 90 something percent of folks who struggle with eating disorders have trauma.
Of course, yeah.
And I think it's upwards of 50, if I remember correctly, it's upwards of like 50% have PTSD, and then 40% of folks with DID have eating disorders. So, I mean, we can't separate people out like this, yet we do.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, the convenience side of it. And I was just, I mean, interested, like mentioned about the CTAD, the YouTube thing, a little plug, because I'm just embarking on a mini series about sort of comorbid conditions, and eating disorders is going to be one of those. Just seeing how it fits in the spectrum of complex trauma and dissociation, because it's right in there. Yeah. So I'm working on some of the common ones to just try and develop an understanding, or just make it apparent that, there's links. Yeah, you can have these conditions as standalone things, because there will always be someone that has a standalone condition of any of this stuff. But we got to think about what underlies everything. So I'll be looking at that in a bit more detail as we go along.
Oh, that's great. It's one of my favorite topics. You're recently presenting at a conference about the presentation of eating disorders in DID, because different parts can have different eating disorders. And also parts, if you don't have good internal communication or cooperation, and parts are just kind of eating whatever they want when they want.
Yeah.
You can have something that gets misdiagnosed as binge eating disorder when it's actually not binge eating disorder.
Completely different.
It's just really bad internal communication,
Yeah. And the formulation, I mean, this is the thing, the psychology approach, that formulate is that you just look. So you look at the situation, you look at the factors, you look at all the variables around it, you look at the patterns of behavior, the timing of things, and then you say, that fits perfectly into a DID paradigm. That just, I wonder, and then you bring out like the screening forms, the DES, the SDQ, and you go, hey, maybe just fill one of these out while you're in the waiting room before you head out. 10 minutes of your time, you never know, right? What's to lose?
And some of those scores can be pretty high.
They can, yeah.
Especially in people who I think are functioning pretty well, which again goes back to that sort of misnomer that somehow if you have DID or OSDD, you're just a quote unquote mess. It's not always the case. Internally, it might feel that way.
Oh, yeah. But like you said, the compensation effect is, when you think about what the purpose of DID is, it's a survival construct, it's a defense system. So some people are enormously chaotic in their lives, and their dissociation, whether it's OSDD or amnesia or whatever, is really, causes major havoc, chaos, people in financial ruin, in relationship ruin, all of these things, can't hold down a job, can't finish a course. There are people that have this stuff. But there are plenty that are holding down families and kids and work and education. Teachers, not just being in education, they're delivering it. I've had a number of patients come through our clinic who are great parents, great teachers, great doctors. There's certain things that you'd encourage them not to do. But that's true for all of us, right? If you're in a bad day, don't do a thing, right? If you suffer from migraines, we'd say, well, fine, you're okay to drive, but if you're about to get in a car and do a long journey and your migraine is started, skip the journey. I mean,
yes,
we've all got vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. When you think about beginning to treat somebody that you've just met as a client who you just know has DID, OSDD, where do you generally start? What's the most important thing, do you think, for someone to be focused on in order for treatment to move forward and progress?
I always start with the environment. You've got to have the right environment. And I think because that gets in the way of the best therapists. If the environment is poor, so if you don't have good access, if it's not quiet, if it's not calm, if it doesn't feel safe, then you're onto a kind of a loser before you've even opened the first word. So if you get the environment right, and we put a lot of time and effort into our environment, and we get a lot of really positive feedback on that, the nature of the room, the feel of the room, how you're welcomed at the door, just how you say hello to each other, and just how kind and thoughtful, just the human qualities. If you deliver all of that naturally, like it's not put on, it's not a front or a fake in any way, it's just natural. You're there for the right reasons and you've put effort into the space, whether they're chairs or not, whether they're comfortable or not. Like when we do our work, I'll always say to someone before I see them, outside of alcohol, right? Because that's fair enough. What would you really like to have, to drink? And when we start the session, I'm going to be having a drink. If you're happy to have a drink, I'll get you one. What would you like? And they go, oh, water will be fine. I go, yeah, okay, water's fine. But what might else you want? And, they might say something like they want some caramel latte or something. And it's like, then that's what you'll have. And then when they come through the door, I say, I'll just go get the drinks and I'll come back from the kitchen into the therapy room, and that will be the drink that they've got. And that you can just tell that this is going to work from small interactions like that. So actually the words that you use, the therapeutic start, if you get it right and you make that first person feel safe and comfortable, you can talk about the weather for 20 minutes and you'll have a good session.
That's such great advice. Everybody's going to move to the UK for the caramel latte now, right?
Yeah, as long as you don't get raided by ducks, halfway through the session. But yeah, I think, and I've worked in our National Health Service for many, many years, and there's really clinical rooms, and I know therapists are working out of general practice surgeries, and there's beds in those rooms, right? There's a bed with a screen around it because the GP will be working in there that might have to do, clinical obs of someone. So you potentially got a traumatized person from childhood trauma walking into the room the first thing, they're meeting you for the first time, and they look to the right and there's a bed in the room and you think, what the hell? And then that person might dissociate straight away. So then the first thing is this room does not feel safe. So it doesn't matter then what you say or how good you are as a therapist. If that person just does not feel safe, you're going to have to do so much work to get them to a point of safety that if you just, if you got it right to start with, you just don't have to do that. So it's just so much simpler. And I love it when we get the feedback on our space. And I work with an assistant, Sophie. We meet people together and we share the coffee, the teas, and everything in this room has been designed and thought through really carefully. Some people with autism, some people don't have autism, some people DID, some people just with stress, anxiety, whatever it might be. But the environment has been really thoughtfully prepared and managed. And it's an extension of my passion for the field, that I've got my own room and I've designed it and I've put a lot of time and effort into getting it so that it feels like the therapy room that I think would be great for someone to sit down in.
It sounds incredible. Comes with coffee and ducks, and what more can you ask for?
Optional cat. Yeah.
I wonder if you could potentially explain to people what the concept of passive influence is, because it feels very misunderstood.
Yeah. Okay.
I hear lots of people asking, I've read about passive influence. I'm not sure that I get what that is.
Okay. So I say I'll just use using examples of things because I think that's easier. So if you think of passive influence, you've got active influence. So active influence is saying to you, you can and you can't. So let's say I had a patient who needed to go to work and they were basically being told, you're not going to go to work and we're going to stop it from happening. And it was an internal command type thing, the sort of thing that gets people like labeled with schizophrenia and psychosis, that sort of command hallucination type thing. Very, very active is like, I'm not going to let you do it. You are not to speak. You are not to tell the therapist what you're going to say. You are not to give my name out, right? So that's very active influence. So the passive influence I see as being this little bit more under the carpet type thing. And I use the example that I often use with people is the supermarket. When you're going through a supermarket, you've got your weekly shop to do, you're filling your trolley with all the stuff, and you are drawn to an item, or which might be a toy, or might be some sweets, or some popcorn crisps, or some little brightly colored things, or nice smelly stuff. You don't know why, and you're just suddenly drawn to it. Suddenly it appears attractive. It appears like something you want, and you sort of put it in the trolley whilst also looking at it going, I don't even like this. I don't want this. And yet it's there and it's somehow manifests itself in the trolley. And you think it's probably not a good idea to put it back. So you go, well, I'll roll with it. I'll take it and I'll go with this. And then you get to the checkout and you're a little bit embarrassed that this thing's completely different from everything else. Might be like a little pair of like socks for a 3-year-old with, yellow ducks or something on it. And you go, I just don't really know why I've got this, but I'm going to buy it anyway. And I think that sort of influence is like there's no real sense of the reason behind it. There's no verbalization to it. It's not clear, but it's a feeling. It's like a communicated feeling. Not quite like you're being remote controlled, because that's a bit too much. It's much more like you're just sort of gently drawn to something and it appears like this is needed. And I think that there's lots of other examples, but that's the one that people often go to and go, "God, you know what? That happens to me so often."
That's a great definition for folks. I just see so much confusion around that, and people are trying to figure out, does this happen to me? Does this not happen to me? That's really helpful for folks.
And it's often the one that makes people feel like they're going mad, because when you've got that voice, you can at least pinpoint it. I have a voice in my head and it tells me I should do things and it tells me I shouldn't do things. You've got a framework to understand what it is you're supposed to do or not supposed to do by virtue of the voice. But with the passive influence, it leads people to really doubt their sanity more. Like, why would I do this? Why would I'm a 45-year-old woman and I'm going and I'm buying something for a 6-year-old boy that I don't have. Why would am I going crazy with this? And you don't tell anyone, because people will look at you like you are crazy. Like, I went to the supermarket, did my weekly shop, and I came back with this kind of, I don't know, shower gel that's, smells like bubble gum. People look at you, go, well, why? And you go, I don't know why I bought it. And they're going to go, are you all right?
Yep.
So you just don't tell anyone you're doing it. You just go through life with this like underlying embarrassment that it's happening. No one else seems to be doing it. So you can't tell anyone you're doing it because you don't want to get locked up. You don't want people to think you're crazy. So it just sits there in the background and can go for years and years and years.
I think over time, you can also get to a place where as soon as it happens, you kind of acknowledge it for yourself and then you forget about it purposefully. Like,
Yeah.
that happened again, moving on, push it away, move on with life.
Moving on. Yeah. Oh, here we go again. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. And that doesn't sound debilitating, but that's just one of maybe 100 things you're having to do that for.
Yeah.
And then it suddenly becomes very debilitating.
It's similar. I mention this a lot in podcast episodes when we talk about things like amnesia, because so many people believe that the only experience of amnesia is suddenly waking up in another environment, having absolutely no idea how you got there and being profoundly confused. And yes, that happens to some people, but it doesn't happen to everyone. There are so many other presentations of amnesia, and a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of it you don't even recognize because you have this internal narrative of yourself while somebody's telling you about an experience. I mean, I share all the time my internal dialogue around that. Somebody would tell me about this thing that we did, and I would think,
yeah,
that wasn't me. I would never do that.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Or, somebody else, my husband in particular, we would have apparently a conversation and I'd ask a question. He'd say, we just talked about that yesterday. I'm like, why are you gaslighting me, for God's sakes?
Yeah, I know, because it feels like you're being gaslighted, right? But you're not.
And it's easy if you're in that sort of mechanism or way of life where you acknowledge briefly and then you push it away and keep going. You don't realize how often you're saying things to yourself like, wow, their memory sucks. That wasn't me.
Yeah.
Or why are they gaslighting me? But when you really begin to work on that awareness of your life and be a little more reflective and figure out how hard it is to be reflective and B, how often
very hard
you're in that space, then you start to go, well, something's not quite right here. Maybe
it is.
Maybe it's not everybody else's memory that sucks.
Maybe there is something here. I think you also have to, you mentioned earlier about the compensation strategies, and you've got to let go of those, because Again, patients will say to me, they get into these conversations in the workplace where it says, hey, you remember we did that? We said we are going to do that thing last week. Of course, my patient is like, nope, nope, don't remember that at all. But outwardly, they then go, oh, yeah, it slipped my mind.
Oh, sorry.
So they compensate for it. So sorry. Yeah. Hey, no, well, let's go on. Let's do it now. Let's do it now. And then it passes because you got away with it. You then don't address it.
Yes.
So if your compensation strategies for dissociation are particularly good, then you don't address the dissociation because you don't need to. But then you'll be compensating all your life. And I think people deserve a better life than just having to work these strategies in all threads of their life when I don't have to do that stuff. I'm kind of free, so you have the right to be free of this in whatever form that actually ends up looking like, but to have the life of choice and control, even with all the dissociation, but you still have choice and control. That's got to be the freedom thing.
It lends to increased feelings of competence too, I'm sure, when you are in that space of continually dissociating and therefore forgetting, and you are compensating by saying, oh, I'm really sorry,
Yeah.
slipped my mind, or I was just so busy I didn't get to it. And that's very believable, right? Because jobs today are super packed with plenty of things.
Everyone's stressed and racing around. Yeah.
There's also a place, however, where that continued sort of forgetting due to dissociation ends up making you feel a little ditzy and doesn't really allow you to appreciate, your own level of intelligence and competence and what you can do.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
your competence and intelligence is there. It's the dissociation that is creating these dynamics that make it challenging and can lead to what I feel like are big feelings of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that can happen. And we talk a lot about both imposter syndrome and potential, is that the dissociation, while it's there to protect you, it holds you back. And when you don't believe in your own skill set, you don't have, some people are clearly marvelously skilled, but they can't see it, they can't reflect on that. It won't let them in a way, because let's say if you were an artist and you were putting together some fantastic work, sculptures, painting, whatever it might be, and you realized how good it is, you'd want to promote it. But promoting that skill set is what dissociation doesn't want you to do, because then you're putting yourself out there in the world and in harm's way. So if you don't ever promote your work, you can't be attacked for your work. No one's going to say anything bad about it. No one's going to criticize it if no one sees it. So the dissociations, they're like, no, stay in, keep it to yourself. Paint, but put it in the attic. Paint, but put it in the attic. But then you don't ever get the feedback. You don't get people telling you it's wonderful and it's fantastic, and then proving it by buying the stuff and then putting up in their walls in their houses and showing you, look, I put this up. I love it. I genuinely love it. So the dissociation gets in the way of that, and it can create this kind of false sense of self, because it needs to have that to be successful. And you've got to say to the dissociation, it's time we stop this. Let's figure out a different way of moving forward with all my stuff, right? With everything. But there's got to be a way to make the world safer for us to embark on an adventure out there.
And terrifying
yeah
to consider being that vulnerable
Yeah.
when you've had so many layers of protection, at least emotionally.
Emotionally, yes, absolutely. But then that's so sad, because being scared, being terrified of doing something is part of the fun of life. Like again, back to that non-traumatized, non-dissociative person. When I'm scared, it's usually because I'm doing something new. But there's a real excitement, because physiologically, fear and anxiety and excitement are exactly the same. It's just our perspective. So one person, getting on a roller coaster, can't wait and loved it. Another one is totally terrified, but the heart's beating at the same rate for both. So being terrified of things and then accomplishing the thing that you're scared of is really what so much of life is all about. Back to that thing at the start, the dream, I'm scared. What if I never get to achieve this? What if I get there and it's rubbish and I hate every minute of it? Well, so what? Because being scared is part of the challenge of life. But traumatized people have got a very different perspective, correctly so, about fear, because they've generally been given things to be scared of, whereas I haven't really. Life's challenges are my fears, not like genuine stuff that people have gone through in their lives. That's a whole level of fear that is completely different. And you realize that going through that fear too early in life kind of spoils your experience, your joyful experience of fear.
Yeah.
Because it is, we've all got it. It's a beautiful emotion because it leads you into so many interesting places. But the childhood trauma really just robs people of that sense.
It is a pretty sizable thief, that's for sure.
Yeah, really.
Related to fear, for some reason, this popped into my head while you were talking. Do you have any thoughts for, it could be for clients or for therapists working with them? I know people have different experiences of their systems. There are some people that experience zero shame about having alters and talk about them and share their names and share their attributes and share all sorts of things,
Yeah.
often quite publicly. And on the flip side, there are many people that do struggle with lots of internal shame about their system when they go to therapy and they know, like, therapy is a safe place. I know that the person sitting across from me either isn't judging me, or even if they are, they do this all the time. So this isn't going to be anything new for them. Yet they really feel stuck when it comes to being able to talk about and share what they know about the different parts of their system.
Yeah.
Any words of wisdom to kind of help either those folks or the therapists that are working with them that can see that their clients are just so stuck?
Yeah, I think social media has a lot of good and a lot of bad about it. And that's, wow, that's not anything new. That's not going to surprise anyone.
Right.
But I think I used to be able to, in the early days, I used to say to people that here's some channels, go have a look, right? Because there's people talking about dissociation, there's people being dissociative. And we had this whole service here called First Person Plural, which was based on experts by experiences. These were people with DID fronting talks in training events and things. And that's how, when I started learning about this, there were experts by experience in the room. I've got DID and I'm going to share my experience with you. And they did it tactfully, they did it thoughtfully, and they did it gently, and they lifetime experience, right? And it's big stuff. And I think that seems to be absent in the social media world because it's so much about big. And what these people did is they shared their internal worlds, their systems in a small way. They just talked about it. They, you didn't necessarily see it, but people just talked about it. And I think, people are wanting to show, and then here's my alters and here's my system. And that's great. I think there's a lot of good that can be achieved with that. I think it could be done with a sense of I'm doing, like, there's almost like a parallel narrative to go along with that. Like, I'm going to show you my system, I'm going to show you my alters, and they can come out on camera and they can do stuff, and that brilliant, lovely. But how about also say that that's not everyone's experience of DID, and I'm really lucky to be able to do this. And I know that this isn't what most people do, and I wouldn't want people to think that this is normal for DID, because that overt DID is not the norm. It's the covert DID is the norm. But that's not as kind of attractive on screen, is it? That's the thing. If you stand there and go, look, I have so many parts, but they don't want to come out and say anything because they're all frightened and have a lot of shame about that, that's just not going to get many likes. Whereas someone going bang, 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 here's all my stuff, gets a lot of attention, and people go, oh, wow, that's exciting. That's exciting. It can be exciting, but I would love to see this sort of caveat attached to it of saying this isn't everyone's experience of DID. And I would not want anyone to think that they should be like this just because I am. Because, and I watch this stuff sometimes, and I look at it and go, that's fantastic, but I'm not sure what the message is. And then my patients say to me, I can't look at this stuff. I can't go on TikTok because it makes me feel like I don't have DID, because it's nothing like that. And I would think, wouldn't it be great if you could present your DID without this shame? And also say that, don't think that because you can't do this, yours is any less or any more than mine. We're just different with the same condition.
Yeah.
But I don't watch enough of it now to know if anyone is saying that. But my sense, my patients tell me when they look, I don't think anyone's really putting it out there like that. That's the change I would like to see. So by all means, be there, do it, but sensitively to the people watching, and not, in the way that it kind of is like, hey, it's easy. I've got DID and it's brilliant.
Agreed. I think it's nice that there is a movement sort of towards more plural pride, if you will, for people to just drop the shame. I think it's great.
Yeah.
And there's so many people that can't get anywhere near there because they're just so stuck, and you're right. It would be really
No way.
nice to see varied presentations to help people have that
Yeah.
identification, which is part of the purpose of this whole podcast series. If we can, the more voices, the more people, the more opinions,
Yeah.
hopefully the more able we are to reach people who can listen and say, wait, that actually sounds like me. And
yeah, that's the trick, isn't it?
yeah, let me go dig in and see what other information that I can get that might be useful to me. That how can I get more information?
Yeah, because that's ultimately what the awareness raising is. We don't want to scare people off. Don't want to say to people, if you've got DID, you're a mess. If you've got DID, your alters are switching all over the place and you're going to have enormous credit card debt. That's just true for some people, but not the norm. It's so we've got to present things in a way that is inclusive, that people feel as if that I might have that condition because it kind of sounds like I do, but I don't want to be so scared of it.
Yeah.
That I don't approach anyone and I don't tell anyone, because then it remains hidden and then you're stuck. And what we do know, because I have first attender clients in their 60s and 70s, it hasn't got any better on its own. They've had this since they were 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, and they're now in their 70s, and it has not got better on its own. So I see no evidence for this just getting better on its own. I see lots of evidence for people building a very complex set of compensatory strategies to protect the world from finding out you've got DID. But you're never going to experience life with control and choice and the freedom of movement, because you can still have the DID. We're not talking about removing the DID. What we're talking about is making a world where that sits as part of it. That's just part of the thread of your life. But you have freedom. You're not having to hide, and you're not having to do a million things every day just to be able to go to the shop and buy a pint of milk.
Yeah.
Because why should you have to, right? I mean,
Such a poignant point that you just made, though, about people that you're seeing in their 60s and 70s and certainly 50s and 40s as well. The being diagnosed that late, or having the realization that, oh, wow, this is actually true.
Yeah.
Or for folks who are in the shoes similar to my own, heard the diagnosis back in the 90s, good luck, have a good life. And then, eventually 30 years later, you go, oh, hell, maybe I should do something about this. Maybe things have changed,
Yeah.
Your point that it doesn't go away, totally agree, but that it can be better is so important. And
yes,
I'm so familiar with different people who are later in life who feel devastated that it's only now that they're able to begin. And any sort of words of wisdom for them?
I think prepare for the grief, because it's a double hit, because you have the grief of the lost childhood, because that's what we deal with pretty much everybody. We get to that point where they just realize, they look back and they go, you know what, I was never a child, was never allowed to be a child in the proper sense of the word. And there's an enormous grief for that lost childhood. And then, but you have that conversation with someone who's, say, 62 years old, and you go, but you stopped being a child when you're like 16 or 18 and you're now 62. So you've got like 44 years or whatever of loss as an adult. The best years of your life, is kind of how the society presents this, have been taken up hiding or running or being dissociative, or being, in mental health facilities, or being medicated, or being misdiagnosed. And your whole life has basically been spent carrying this thing. And when a person realizes that they might be on some sort of like treatment pathway or protocol where they can actually feel better and improve and get some recovery, and they get that, and then they look back and go, their whole adult life has been blighted by this, and then it's the grief of that. So I suppose the best advice I have is, don't be frightened of going for it. Always think that there's time for you, whether you've got a week, a day, or 10 years, go for it. But be prepared for the sadness and the grief that comes with that, because it will be there.
Really good advice. I always love to tell people, you're still alive today. Why not try to make that life better? None of us, it sounds cliche, right? None of us know how much time we have left on the planet.
Yeah, always improve.
So do the best you can with what you have today, and always keep striving for what may be better tomorrow.
Yeah. And look to the self, that reflectiveness, that potential. What is it that you really want to make of yourself? Because that's such a great question. If you didn't have this, if this dissociation wasn't there, if this was not an option, right? That kind of the brief solution focused therapy question, if all of this, if you woke up tomorrow and it just wasn't here, right? If the DID, the trauma, none of it was just gone, right? Magic wanded it away. What would you do with your life? And then people will often start with, I don't know. And then you kind of work with them. You get to a point of coming up with an idea. I want to be an artist. I want to be a writer. I want to be a painter. I want to be a tax accountant, whatever it might be. And you look to them and go, well, you can do that with the DID,
Yeah.
It just takes effort. And I love that when we get into those sort of clinical conversations, because we realize we're in phase 3 of the treatment protocols, sometimes quite early on, because we're already thinking about integration. We're already thinking about a life away from the dissociative, the disordered bit of the dissociation. But why not plant the seed of that early on and say, you know what, you can be these things. We've just got to work out how to find that door. Once we've got to that door, you can run through it and you can be all of the things you want to be. But let's work at it. Let's put that down there and go on with it.
There's so much hope in that statement that I'm hoping that everybody is taking in.
I hope, yeah.
When you said that, you made me start thinking a little bit about your YouTube channel, which has truly phenomenal content on there. I have some favorite videos that you've done.
Oh, thank you.
If you could choose like three videos that you've done through the CTAD Clinic channel for clients that you say, if you can only watch 3 on my channel, these are the 3 as a client that I would want you to see.
Yeah. I know 2 straight away. The first one, the denial and recognition later in life. I think that one's been a real powerful one because that hits into that. It's never too late, but there's loads of reasons why it's taken a long time. Because I don't think people should feel ashamed that they spent 30 years before they even took this into account, right? There's reasons for that. So that video, I really like that one because that just helps people feel okay about having spent a long time before they did anything.
Yes.
The second one, I really like the one I did with the glasses of water in the garden, because that was such a fun thing to do, because I just sloshed water about and I was kind of I never script any of the videos, so I kind of give a general feel of what I'm going to say, and then I just turn the camera on and just get on with it. And it just my empty brain just sort of, my words just start doing their thing. I feel like quite lucky that that can happen. So I really enjoy doing that, sloshing the glasses of water about, and I've had a lot of positive commentary about that. So I think I'd say those were the 2 big ones for people to sit there and because those are ones where I think people have really taken that message in, like it's been really meaningful, both of those things. The third one, trickier, because I don't know, because that's the sort of the extra, isn't it? The third one, maybe one of the theory ones, like the structural dissociation or the action systems ones, because that's a bit more technical. And I think that helps people understand that dissociation isn't this sort of like abandoned wild thing. It's actually got rules attached to it, because it's the brain. The brain has a structure. The brain has rules of behavior and a code built into it. And it's just that code's been used for something different. And if you understand that a lot of the reasons why things have gone strange is because the code is being applied for a strange thing, it starts making more sense. So I think, either the action systems one or the structural dissociation would be my third one.
Those are really good. I'm going to throw out the ones of yours that I recommend a lot. One of my very favorites that you've done is...
Please do. Yeah, no, I'd love to know.
Of course, I'm not going to remember the exact title, but basically it's the one about why is my internal communication not working?
Oh, yeah.
Really incredibly helpful, because I think people don't realize that you do have to be willing and open to listen to anything that your ultras have to say, and that you can't just show up whenever the heck you want to show up, that you need to actually be committed. Yes. And, some of them are calling me a hypocrite, but whatever.
No. And they're listening to you.
I get it. I also really appreciated, even though I don't like the reality of it, I really appreciated one that you had done where you were talking about, of course, I can't remember the exact topic, but what you said, you were talking about the parts that go to work, and that sometimes, younger parts don't want to be at work for obvious reasons. And there are parts that shouldn't be at work for other obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But there are a part or parts that can function at work. And sometimes that's all they can do, because they have to share time in the body with other parts. And so maybe they're only going to get 15 or 30 minutes on a Saturday to read a book. And for now, right? And so while that can sort of suck, it also allows you to eat have shelter over your head and carry on with life. And so that's just the way that it is. And being that direct to sort of
Yep.
say, that's just what you got to do right now.
They don't get the nice stuff in a way. Yeah.
It can, there can be feelings about
Yeah.
that, but there's reality to that's just what has to happen in order to be okay was really helpful.
Yes, that's the job, right? Oh, that's great. That's lovely feedback.
And the other one is you did one on what integration is. That gets a lot of emotion from people who are like, I don't want integration because they're also talking about integration as if it's final fusion. And
yeah, that can be scary.
I thought you did such an incredible job at explaining integration also means bringing down those barriers between parts so you can share information and it allows life to be a lot more fluid. So can we not be afraid of the word integration? Yeah, there's a lot of things we need to integrate in life, right? So
yes, use it properly. Yeah. Well, that's I love that you brought the integration one up because I when I talk to people about the phase treatment approach, you know, the stabilization trauma and then the integration thing, I say that integration, I look at it in two ways. So one is that internal integration, the sort of the integration of self, but also the integration into the world as a slightly less or non-dissociative person, because you're going to have to learn how to do stuff all over again. And it could be first job, first relationships, first driving lesson, whatever it might be, that actually being in the world is really hard and having emotions is really hard. And being in the world with all those new emotions, and you've got no practice, you've got no frame of reference, you've never done this before, and yet you're starting at 40. It's the first time you'll ever have really felt this or done this thing at the age of 40 in a much less dissociative way. And you've got to integrate that yourself into the world to find a way of making it comfortable. And so I see, I love, I'm really glad you picked the integration one up because I have a real like dual approach to it. And I say to people that phase treatment thing is about integrating into the world as much as the cell.
I think it's really important for people to understand those different sort of definitions and concepts of integration rather than, sort of hearing it and either saying, I don't want anything to do with it, or it's the only thing that I want, potentially if they're thinking about something like final fusion. People's goals are people's goals, whatever they are, they're fine.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And we should never push anyone. I mean, that's the other thing. People feel like, if I go into DID therapy, I'm going to be made to have fusion. I'm going to be made to have all my parts kind of eventually just sort of disappear and just be left with me. I don't want that. And go, cool, then don't have that. That's fine. And they like, what? So I get to choose. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, you get to choose what you want. Whether we can deliver it is up for grabs, but we'll head in that direction, certainly. And it can change. You might start with one and then you might get a year in and then you want to complete, I want everything gone. I want it all gone. I just want to be me. And then 12 months in, it's like, no, I really like these folks. This is really kind of neat.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, let's keep them then. It's a collaborative approach to therapy. We're not telling anyone, how they should end up being. We're saying you need to tell us how you want to be and we'll try and get you there.
The goal being that your life works better for you and you feel better in it, however that comes to be for each individual.
Yeah. And that's the thing about therapy. It's like, I wouldn't want anyone to come into my world, my job, the way I go about this and tell me that I should be doing it their way. I'll listen if someone says, who knows what they're talking about comes in and says, you're doing it wrong. I'll be like, oh no, right? And I'll change. Because I can learn and we make mistakes and we always learn from our mistakes. But if someone just comes in and says, you need to do your therapy like I do my therapy, I'm going to say, bog off. Not a chance, right? This is how I do it. This is how I enjoy doing it, and it's working. So and I'm trained and I'm competent and I'm, all of those things.
Yeah.
You do your thing, I do my thing. That's great. Absolutely wonderful. And then the person can choose what works best for them. If we're all just being told how to do everything the same, we're going to miss so much.
So very true.
I wouldn't want it. And I'm not going to say to anyone, this is how you have to be. This is how you have to end up. That's just absolutely not how we do things here.
Do you have favorite sort of resources for, it doesn't matter if it's clients or therapists, things that you recommend where you say, this is really something that you should take a look at?
Yeah. I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, it's a good, I mean, I'd say you've got like the folks who I consider to be your sort of like elite level writers, so like your Janina Fishers, Bethany Brand, Suzette Boone, Ellett Ninehouse, you know, Kathy Storr, those kind of that elite tier of people in the field that have just been so brilliant in sharing, and Colin Ross as well. You know, they've just been sharing so much information. So go read their stuff because it's really good. Look at what they're doing. Watch the YouTube clips of them doing their conferences and talks and things. So that's kind of an easy one. I think for sort of therapeutic resources where people are looking for good quality information, in the UK, we have a lady called Carolyn Spring, who's got a whole load of stuff that she promotes, and she's a survivor herself. So, you know, she really talks from the heart and she does it very eloquently, and she runs really good training courses, has loads of great resources. So I always recommend Carolyn's stuff. And then the Australians, there's Blue Knot Foundation. I always say to people, go have a look at their stuff. They do, if you're willing to stay up in the middle of the night, depending on what time zone you're from, their training courses are fabulous and they're pretty well priced and they're very good. So there's Blue Knot Foundation in Australia, good, and in the States you've got the ISSTD, and in Europe we've got ESTD. So we have those as best as they can. So it's that kind of established, and on the basis of there's a real like foundation to this work. It's like it's got key people that have been dedicated their lives to pursuing knowledge in this field, and then you can't go far wrong with that, because if they were charlatans, you know, if they were rubbish, they'd have been found out many years ago. And you know, again, people can make mistakes and people can say things and do things which aren't particularly great, but we're all there. I think it's just that really established quality of stuff. And if you've got people like Suzette Boone producing a book or producing a series of techniques for how to manage, like working with dissociation, working in groups and things, you know it's going to be good because Suzette's been doing this like all her life and she listens to feedback. And you know, you're looking at the pinnacle of a person's career being offered to you in a book for like $30 or something. So go get that stuff. It's brilliant.
Oh, those are great resources. And what I'll do in the show notes is I'll link literally everything, that all the resources that we've talked about. So the specific
Wonderful.
YouTube episodes, the books, I'll go look for those.
Go look for those. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Fabulous.
It'll be easy for people to just kind of click and go.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been really wonderful. A great conversation that I'm super grateful for.
I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for your time and your expertise and just sharing yourself so openly with us today.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely welcome. I mean, it's just been, it's not really, I've kind of completely forgot that we were actually recording anything. I think we're just talking. It's just been lovely to meet you, to talk with you and just share some thoughts on all of this. It's been great.
Has been really wonderful. If people want to find you, we know they can find you at the CTAD clinic, Cheshire Psychology.
Yep. All on the website. Yeah.
Any place else people should look? Any trainings that you're giving coming up that people should know about?
I mean, we keep an eye on the website because we've got like a training schedule. So I'm doing quite a lot of training, obviously in the UK, because that's where I'm based. Fun fact, I'm going on a mini American tour in a few months' time. So it's like a test to see whether or not this is something that I could do a little bit more regularly. So I'm going to be in 3 different cities, starting in Kansas City, then going in Cincinnati, and then finishing up in New York. Just meeting therapists, doing some talks, some informal or formal lectures, depending on what we've got. Because I think I love the States, and I know that there's a massive need for lots of this material in the States. We're limited by licensing as what we can provide therapeutically. So what I'm doing is some sort of fact finding, like a scouting thing, to sort of head out to see whether or not, you know, me rocking up in some random city or something and doing a talk would be of interest to people. So I'm testing that out in November. So I'm going to be in the States for a week, just sort of talking and wandering around and putting on these little talk things. And I've got some wonderfully just amazing people in those places that are helping me out with sort of a venue and getting people together and doing things like that. So keep a lookout on the website for stuff like that. Also planning on series of webinars for the States, so clinicians and people with the condition in the States. So depending on the type of webinar, modular courses, things like that. So I'm really, over the next year or two, I'm really trying to figure out what's a way of being able to help people in the US and Canada without just being able to do the therapy, because we're not allowed to do the therapy to you guys out there. We're just not allowed to, but we can do training and we can consult, we can supervise, so we're really building a bigger platform for that. All going to be on the website, and I'll promote things on the YouTube channel when we've got things. So some exciting stuff. So, and I did put one comment out. I said, is anyone, I think, because I said like Chicago, Texas, Florida, places like that I'd like to visit in the future. If anyone knows of places that would be good to do talks or groups that are being run that I could just visit and say hello to and spend an evening with or have lunch with, let me know. So it's that kind of fluid, I suppose.
Oh, well, now I'm going to be on a mission to get you to Boston. So
I love Boston. I've been before. It's absolutely wonderful. So yeah, happily go back to Boston.
That would be fantastic. This is exciting. So we'll make sure that people stay in touch with where you're going to be and what you're up to. I'll make sure that everything is linked, like I said, in the show notes, including the event section of your site, so that people can just bookmark it. I think that would be fantastic. And
brilliant. Thank you. Lots of interesting stuff. Hopefully it's interesting. I mean, I think it's a good idea. It remains to be seen, right? I'll test it. This is the thing that I said at the start, the dream, right? I've wanted to do this, so I can. So I'm going to, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, yeah, well, it's got to go for it.
I think it's fantastic, because think of how many people's lives that you're going to impact that way. Like, doing therapy is great, but you can only see so many individuals in the course of a work day or a work week, versus when you're out training, speaking, putting together modular courses. Every therapist that takes your training, and including some of the clients I know will go to those trainings too, just to get the information, help themselves. Countless lives are going to be touched. And that is really cool.
I would really hope so. I mean, that's kind of like my ultimate goal, really, isn't it? Just make a difference. That's the thing, always.
I'm excited. I know everyone's excited.
Hey, fabulous.
Thank you so very much.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thank you so much for being here. If you have OSDD or DID, your minds may have been blown just as much as ours were at various different points, but especially learning about what it's like inside the headspace of somebody who isn't multiple. Mind-blowing. And whether you have DID, OSDD, are a provider or supporter, we really hope you enjoyed this episode and all its many great takeaways from Dr. Mike Lloyd as much as we did. Please be sure to follow him on the CTAD YouTube channel, check out their website, and please check out the resources that he listed, which are linked in the show notes below. Until next time, keep shining bright and let's keep healing. Thank you for tuning in. You can find our blog on Substack at healingmyparts.substack.com and on Instagram at healingmyparts. Just a disclaimer, any information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for professional therapy or behavioral health care. Nor does listening to the podcast constitute a therapist-client relationship. Please be sure to take extra good care of you. And until next time, keep healing and thriving.